Hello everyone, how are you all today? This is Ashar Khan, your SST teacher from Shiv Jyoti Educational Group Kota. And students, today we are going to learn a new chapter in history. So students, today we are going to start a new chapter in our history book. So open your history book on page number 103. Okay, the chapter is New Empires and Kingdoms. Chapter number 10, New Empires and Kingdoms, on page number 103. Students, if you will remember, in our last history chapter, we learned about traders, kings and pilgrims. So in this chapter, we are focusing on those kingdoms, okay? We learned about some southern kingdoms as well as some northwestern kingdoms. So in this chapter, we will be learning about those kingdoms and kings in detail. So let us start. Like every other chapter in your history book, students, this chapter also starts with a story. So let us read that. Arvind plays a king. Arvind had been chosen to act as a king in the school play. He had expected to march solemnly in splendid robes, to twirl his mustache and wield the silver paper wrapped sword with gusto. So Arvind, this boy, was supposed to play a king in a drama, in a school play. Okay, he used to think that I will wear good quality clothes like a king does and wave my sword. But imagine his surprise when he was told that he would have to sit and play a veena. Now, Arvind was told that you are not supposed to fight anyone, just supposed to sit and play a veena, which is a musical instrument, and recite poetry. A musician king, who was that, he wondered. Now, Arvind is wondering, who is this king that he is supposed to follow? Okay, the king who used to recite poetry and play veena. So that begins our first topic of the chapter, which is Prashastis and what they tell us. Okay, what does this word here mean? Prashastis, which we are going to learn in a minute. So let us begin. Arvind was supposed to be acting as Samudragupta, a famous ruler of a dynasty known as the Guptas. Students, if you will remember, we have covered this term dynasty before in our earlier history chapters. Okay, the term dynasty, what does it mean? It means a family who is ruling for generations. A family who has been ruling for generation is called a dynasty. So that means if a king dies and his son becomes the new king, and then after that son dies, his son becomes another king, that is called a dynasty. So Samudragupta was the king of the Gupta dynasty, underline this. And how do we know about this? Okay, how do we know about this Samudragupta and the Gupta dynasty? We know about Samudragupta from a long inscription inscribed at the Ashokan pillar at Allahabad. It was composed as a kavya. What is a kavya? It means a poem by Hari Sen, who was a poet and a minister at the court of Samudragupta. Okay, so how do we know about Samudragupta? An inscription was found at Allahabad on the Ashokan pillar, and a poem was written, which was written by Hari Sen. Okay, so first mark your first internal question on page number 103, students. Your first internal question, that is internal question 1, and the question that I am reciting, listen carefully. What do you mean by Prashasti? Okay, the spelling is given in the book as well, and it is also written on the board. So make no mistakes, it is a new word. What do you mean by Prashasti? Question mark. Okay, start underlining from the second paragraph, second line. The word is written there, Prashasti. After Prashasti, write is. Okay, use your pencil, make a small arrow and write is. Prashasti is a Sanskrit word meaning in praise of. Okay, in praise of means when we say some good stuff about somebody. Okay, that means we are praising that person or that thing. So what does a Prashasti means? It means that we are saying something in praise of. Okay. So students, we found out that how do we know about people from the past, about kings and their kingdoms who used to live in the past. We know about them from the inscription, about the scriptures and poems and stories which were written by the court poets and so on, correct? So one such inscription was found at Allahabad and that was called a Prashasti, okay? And about which king it was written in that Prashasti? About Samudragupta, who was from the Gupta dynasty, okay? Now, inscriptions are engravings on stones and metals, as you can see in the picture here. Look how the writing was engraved on metal and stone so that it cannot be erased by time. Free from the process of tampering, no one can tamper with it, okay? Important Prashastis which are found, the first was Allahabad Prashasti of Harishen describing Samudragupta, which I have already told you. And in this chapter you will learn about another king, that is Ahole Prashasti of Pulakeshin II of Chalukya dynasty. So just as we have learned about Gupta dynasty, we will also be learning about the Chalukya dynasty. Now let us learn more about Samudragupta's Prashasti. So come to the next para. Now let us see what Samudragupta's Prashasti tells us. The poet praised the king in glowing terms. Now the poet Harishen has praised the king, okay, in glowing terms as a warrior. Samudragupta was a warrior. He used to fight as a king who won victories in battle, who was learned and the best of poets. With warrior as well, he was also a poet. He is also described as equal to the gods, okay. The Prashasti was composed in very long sentences, and here is a part of one such sentence. So here there is a paragraph given on page number 104, Samudragupta the warrior. In this, the poet has described about Samudragupta, so let us read. Whose body was most charming, being covered with the plenteous beauty of the marks of hundreds of scars. The writer is writing about Samudragupta, okay, that the warrior, the king Samudragupta was very charming, and his body was covered with beautiful marks of battle scars by battle axes, arrows, spikes, spears, barbed darts, swords, iron clubs, javelins, barbed arrows, long arrows and many other weapons. So student, these are the name of some weapons by using which battles were supposed to be fought. If you want, you can look up these images as well. Now we'll learn about a new map of your history book. The map can be found on page number 105. Now let us see that map here as well. So students, there is a map given here on page number 105 that we are going to see. Now there are 4 kinds of territories which are shown in the map. Let us read about them. This map is based on the information provided in the Prashastis. Harishen describes 4 different kinds of rulers and tells us about Samudragupta's policies towards them. So Harishen is describing about Samudragupta and the different rulers who used to be around them and how Samudragupta's policies, that means how Samudragupta used to behave around those people, those rulers. Okay, so the first kingdom on the map that you can see, it's in green color, and here you can also see it is the rulers of Aryavarta. Now this particular area that you can see is the Aryavarta. The area shaded in green on your map. Here there were 9 rulers who were uprooted and their kingdoms were made a part of Samudragupta's empire. 9 rulers, that means 9 kings used to rule over this part, and they were all uprooted, they were all defeated, and their empire was made into the Gupta empire, okay, Samudragupta's empire. Now the second dynasty or the second area that is marked on your map are the cities which were conquered by the Guptas, okay. The rulers of Dakshinapath. You can see in your map in your book that there are some red dots given on the southern coast, okay. The rulers of Dakshinapath. Here there were 12 rulers, some of whose capitals are marked with red dots on the map. They surrendered to Samudragupta after being defeated, and he then allowed them to rule again. First he defeated them and then he allowed them to rule again. How so? That now you are ruling under me. Whatever I tell you to do, you will have to follow. He told them this. Now, the inner circle of neighboring states. Now, there were some states which were the neighbors. Okay, the neighboring states which included Assam, coastal Bengal, Nepal, and a number of Gana Sankhas. Now, these were the inner circle marked with the color pink in your book. Okay, so These states include Assam, okay, here is Assam, coastal Bengal, Nepal, and other areas, other northwestern areas. The northwestern area is this one, okay. They brought tribute, followed his order and attended his court. Now the rulers of the inner circle, they brought tribute. They used to bring gift to Samudragupta. They used to follow his orders. Whatever Samudragupta used to tell them, they used to follow, and they also attended his court, okay. Now the area marked with blue in your book is the rulers of the outlying areas. Now this was the inner circle. Now there was an outer circle as well. Okay. Now this was the outer circle, means area which were very far from Samudragupta's empire. Okay. Marked in blue on the map, perhaps the descendants of the Kushanas and the Shakas, the rulers of Sri Lanka, who submitted to him and offered daughters in marriage. Now these were the areas who were very far away from the Gupta empire. These rulers submitted to Samudragupta and they used to offer their daughters to him for marriage. So this was the map. I hope you can see the map on page number 105 in your book as well, and can see that the green part was the Samudragupta's empire. Okay. The red dots given are the rulers of Dakshinapat. Then the area marked in pink, okay, the area which is marked in pink are the inner circle, and the area marked in the blue are the outer circle. So make sure that you mark these in your books as well. These were the 4 types of rulers present around Samudragupta's empire. Now our next topic is genealogies. Genealogies simply means family. So our next topic is genealogies. Okay. Now most prashastis also mention the ancestors of the ruler. Ancestors means their elders. Okay. This one mentions Samudragupta's great grandfather, father and mother. Now the prashasti which was found at Allahabad, okay, it also tells us about Samudragupta's family. It tells us about the great grandfather, father and mother. You can underline the names here. His mother was Kumara Devi, belonged to the Lishashvi Gana, while his father Chandragupta was the first ruler of the Gupta dynasty. As you can see, Chandragupta was the first ruler of the Gupta dynasty. Okay. Chandragupta was the first ruler of the Gupta dynasty to adopt the grand title of Maharaja Adhiraj. Now, the title which was given to these kings was Maharaja Adhiraj. That means it's a title greater than Maharaja. Okay. His great grandfather and grandfather are mentioned simply as Maharajas. It seems as if the family gradually rose to importance. So there is a small exercise here. Arrange the titles in order of importance: Raja, Maharaja Dhiraj and Maharaja. So can you tell me which one will come first? Okay, I think the greatest one will be Maharaja Adhiraj. Then on the second we will have Maharaja, and in the lowest we will have Raja. Correct? Now Samudragupta in turn figures in the genealogies of later rulers of the dynasty, such as his son Chandragupta II. Now Chandragupta I, okay, Chandragupta the first was the first ruler of the Gupta dynasty, and his son was Samudragupta. Okay. Then Samudragupta's son was also called Chandragupta. But we cannot have 2 kings with the same name, correct? Because it will create confusion. So how did we differentiate between these 2? We add 2 after it. So Samudragupta's son was called Chandragupta the second. Okay. We know about him from inscriptions and coins. He led an expedition to Western India where he overcame the last of the Shakas. Now what did Chandragupta the second did? He led an expedition, a military expedition to the Western India where he defeated the Shakas. Underline this. According to later belief, his court was full of learned people. Now his court, okay, it was full of good scholars and learned people, including Kalidasa, the poet, and the Aryabhatta, the astronomer, about whom you will read in our further chapters. Okay. Now next comes the topic of Harshvardhan and the Harsh Charita. Let us see that. Okay. Now we are going to learn about Harshvardhana and Harsha Charita. And how do we know about these? The Gupta rulers from their inscriptions and coins. How do we know about these Harsha and Harsha Charita? From their coins and inscriptions, we can find out about some kings from biographies. Now, biographies, what they are? Biographies are the books which are written about certain people, okay? In that book, you can find all that there is to find about that person's life, from birth to death, okay? Important biographies are available in the market of renowned scientists, politicians, as well as actors. Now, Harshvardhana, who ruled over nearly 1400 years ago, was one such ruler. Now, there is a new king, okay? What his name is? Harshvardhana. His court poet Banabhatta wrote his biography, the Harsha Charita, in Sanskrit. Now, Harshavardhana's court poet was Banabhatta, underline this. His court poet Banabhatta wrote his biography, and what is the name of the biography? The Harsha Charita in Sanskrit, okay, which gives us the genealogy of Harsha and ends with him becoming king, okay. That books give us the history about his family, okay, and in the end Harsha becomes the king. As you can see, Harshavardhana was the son of Prabhakar Vardhan, founder of the Vardhan dynasty. Now, there is a new dynasty after Gupta, there is Vardhan dynasty, okay. He was a great conqueror and an able administrator. United the two kingdoms of Thanesar and Kannauj. He united the two kingdoms of Thanesar and Kannauj. He was a good scholar and noted author. Also governed his empire on the same lines as the Guptas. The way the Guptas used to govern their empire, Harshavardhana also governed his empire in the similar way. Now, Xuanzang, about whom we have read in our earlier chapter, also spent a lot of time at Harsha's court and left a detailed account of what he saw. Do you remember this name? Xuanzang. He was a Buddhist Chinese pilgrim who came to India all the way from China, and he used to stay in Harshavardhana's place. Now, Harsha was not the eldest son of his father, but became king of Thanesar after both his father and elder brother died. Now, this is very important because it comes that how does this person becomes a king? Usually what happens, students, that when a king dies, his eldest son becomes the king. But Harsha was not the eldest son. So, how did he become king? When both his father and elder brother died, okay? His brother-in-law was the ruler of Kannauj and he was killed by the ruler of Bengal. Okay, Harsha's brother-in-law was the ruler of Kannauj, okay, and the ruler of Bengal killed him. Then Harsha took over the kingdom of Kannauj, okay, Harsha took over the kingdom of Kannauj and then led an army against the ruler of Bengal, and that is how he united the two kingdoms of Thanesar and Kannauj. Although he was successful in the east and conquered both Magad and Bengal, he was not as successful elsewhere. Although he was a good king, a good warrior, okay, and he had some good wars, okay, he conquered both Magad and Bengal, but he was not as successful elsewhere. He tried to cross the Narmada to march into the Deccan. Narmada is the name of a river. So he tried to go south, okay, but was stopped by a ruler belonging to the Chalukya dynasty, and the name of that ruler was Pulakeshin II. Underline this. Harsha was stopped by a ruler belonging to the Chalukya dynasty, Pulakeshin II. So, up until now we have learned the names of at least 3 dynasties, okay. First one was the Guptas, correct. Second was the Vardhan dynasty, and now we have learnt about the third one, that is Chalukya dynasty. Let us see about that in detail. But first, let us mark the second internal question of your book. On page number 107, students, mark the second internal question. Who was Ravi Kirti? The answer is Ravi Kirti was the court poet, okay, court poet in the court of Chalukya ruler Pulakeshin, okay. So, who was Ravi Kirti? He was the court poet of the Chalukya ruler Pulakeshin, okay. Now, let us move on to our next topic, that is the Pallavas, Chalukyas and Pulakeshin's Prashasti. Now we will learn about different types of rulers and their Prashasti, okay. What have we found about these rulers and their dynasties from their Prashastis, okay. So now let us read. The Pallavas and Chalukyas were the most important ruling dynasties in the South India during this period. Okay, now we are learning about two more dynasties, that is the Pallavas and the Chalukyas, who were the most important ruling families, okay, where in southern India during this period. As you can see here, the kingdoms of the Pallavas spread from the region around their capital, which was Kanchipuram. Okay, as you can see on the map here in the South India, you can see there was a city called Kanchi or Kanchipuram, which was the capital city of the Pallavas. Okay, earlier in our chapter, in our previous chapters, we have also learned about Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas. Now we are learning about the Pallavas. Okay, now Kanchipuram was located around the Kaveri Delta, while that of the Chalukyas was centered around the Raichur Doab between the rivers Krishna and Tungabhadra. Okay. Now Aihole, which was the capital of the Chalukya, was an important trading center. It developed as a religious center with a number of temples. So there was a lot of temples which were built in this dynasty. Now, here was the Chalukyan territory, okay. The capital of the Chalukya was Aihole, okay, and it was an important trading center and also a religious center with a number of temples. The Pallavas and Chalukyas frequently raided one another's lands and especially attacking the capital cities, which were prosperous towns. Now, the best known Chalukya ruler was Pulakeshin II. Okay, the best known Chalukya ruler was Pulakeshin II, underline this. And how do we know about him? From a Prashasti composed by his court poet. Who was the court poet? Ravi Kirti. This tells us about his ancestors who are traced back through 4 generations from father to son. Pulakeshin evidently got his kingdom from his uncle. How did Pulakeshin got his kingdom? From his uncle. Okay. Chalukya power reached its zenith. Zenith means the top level, okay, under him, under Pulakeshin II, okay. He was a follower of Jainism and a contemporary of Harshvardhana, okay. Also waged a war against the Pallava king Mahendra Varman. Now, according to Ravi Kirti writes in his biography that he led expeditions along both the west and the east coast. Beside, he checked the advance of Harsha. He used to keep Harshvardhana in check. There is an interesting play of words in the poem. Harsha means happiness, okay. In Hindi, Harsha means happiness. So, Ravi Kirti has written, after Pulakeshin II defeated Harshvardhana, Ravi Kirti has written that Harsha was no longer Harsha. That means, after the defeat, Harsha was no longer happy. Pulakeshin also attacked the Pallava king, who took shelter behind the walls of Kanchipuram. But both the Chalukya victory was short-lived. Ultimately, both the Pallavas and the Chalukyas gave way to new rulers belonging to the Rashtrakuta and Chola dynasties. Now, but both of these dynasties, okay, the Pallavas and the Chalukyas did not last long, okay. Both of these dynasties collapsed and a new dynasties emerged, okay. Some new dynasties emerged, the Rashtrakuta and Chola dynasty, about which you will study in class 7th, okay. Now comes our next topic, how were these kingdoms administered? How they used to rule, how they used to make these kingdoms function, okay. As in the case of earlier kings, land revenue remained important for these rulers. Okay. As in the case of earlier kings, land revenue remained important for these rulers. Now, land revenue, the tax which they collected from the land was important, okay, and the village administration remained the basic unit. There were some new developments as well. Kings adopted a number of steps to win the support of men who were powerful either economically or socially, or because of their political and military strength. Now, there are some lines given here about different titles and different posts. Let us read about them. Now, some important administrative posts were now hereditary. The word that is given here, hereditary, underline it. It means passed down from generation to generation, okay. Something which is passed down from generation to generation is hereditary, okay. This means that sons succeeded fathers to these posts. Now, there were some posts, okay, in these dynasties which were hereditary. For example, the poet Harishena was a Mahadandanayak or chief judicial officer. He was a judge, okay, like his father. So earlier his father was on the same job. When his father died or retired, he came on to that position. Okay, so some posts were hereditary. Sometimes one person held many offices. What used to happen? One person was given titles of different offices. For instance, beside being a Mahadandanayak, Harishena was a Kumar Amatya, meaning an important minister, and a Sandhi Vigrahika, meaning a minister of war and peace. So Harishena, apart from being a court poet, he has many other titles. Okay, he used to perform a lot of other jobs, such as a Mahadandnayaka, that is a judicial officer, Kumar Amatya, an important minister, and Sandhi Vigrahika, which means a minister of war and peace. Underline these words and their meanings in the second point. Okay. Now, besides, important men probably had a say in local administration. These included the Nagar Shreshthi or chief banker or merchant in the city, the Sarthvaha or leader of the merchant caravans, the Pratham Kulika or the chief craftsman, and the head of the Kayasth or scribes. So these were some of the important jobs which were performed in these times. These policies were reasonably effective. Now they were able to administer their kingdom in a very simple way. But sooner or later, some of these powerful men grew strong enough to set up independent kingdom. But some of these ministers became so powerful that they started their own kingdoms. Okay. Now, our next topic, army, a new kind of army. Now we have learnt about the kings. Now let us learn how much army they had and what kind of soldiers will you find in their army. So now let us learn about army. Like earlier rulers, some of these kings maintained a well-organized army. Like many other rulers which came before them, the kings used to maintain a huge army. Okay. Now, it is a well-organized and enlarged army stood against Harsha's incursion from the north. Okay, when Harsha attacked from the northern direction, the southern kings were ready. Consisted of infantry, cavalry, elephantry, and chariots. Now, what are these? Do you know what these terms mean, students? Infantry means foot soldiers, soldiers who march into battle on foot. Okay. Then cavalry are the horsemen who fight on by riding a horse. Okay. Elephantry, it is evident from the name that these are the people who attack by sitting on top of elephants. And chariots, you already know what chariots are, carts which are pulled by horses. In Hindi we call them Rath. So Pallavas and the Chalukyas maintained army. Okay, let us learn more about these. Now this was the infantry, means foot soldiers. Okay, biggest unit of the army. Ruler employed large contingent of foot soldiers comprised of both regular and irregular troops. Now some of these were paid by the king, others were given salaries. Then came the cavalry. Okay, what are cavalry men? Men who used to sit on horses and fight. Okay, important unit of the Chalukyan army. Ahole Prashasti mentions the Ashwa Sena. Ashwa means horse and Sena means army. So the army of horses. Horses imported from Sindh, Persia and Arabia. Okay, horses were important from foreign lands such as Sindh, Persia and Arabia. Then we had elephantry. Okay, formed the defensive organ of the army. Now the elephant is a beast which is very hard to kill because of its thick skin. Imagine an elephant with armor around it. It will be very tough indeed. Okay, it provided inaccessible cover to the infantry at the rear, accompanied the royalty in times of peace, as well as elephant was also a symbol of peace in their earlier time. And then came the chariots, horse-drawn carts or Rath. They played an important role in warfare. If you have seen Mahabharata and Ramayana in shows, you will find that a lot of kings such as the Pandavas, okay, they used to fight by sitting on a chariot, correct? They were used less in medieval period, seems to be replaced by the cavalry and confined to ceremonial function. Here is a picture or a stone carved chariot given here, okay? So these were kind of the armies which the kings used to maintain. Now comes our next topic, assemblies in the southern kingdom, okay, different kinds of assemblies or groups of people in the south kingdom, okay. The inscription of the Pallavas mention a number of local assemblies. The inscriptions which we have recovered from the Pallava areas, it tells us about local assemblies. These included the Sabha, which was an assembly of Brahman land owners. Underline this, that there used to exist an assembly called Sabha, which consisted of Brahmins who used to own lands. Okay. This assembly functioned through subcommittees which looked after irrigation, agricultural operation, making roads, local temples, etc. Now, this was the assembly which was responsible for agricultural operations, irrigation, road making and local temples. The Ur was a village assembly found in areas where the land owners were not Brahmins. Now, there was another assembly which was not ruled by Brahmins, and that assembly was called Ur. Underline it, that the Ur was a village assembly where the land owners were not Brahmins, and the Nagagram, okay, the Nagaram was an organization of merchants. It is likely that these assemblies were controlled by rich and powerful landowners and merchants. Now, it is more likely to happen that these assemblies were controlled by rich landowners and merchants. Many of these local assemblies continued to function for centuries. Now, our next topic, ordinary people in the kingdoms. Enough about kings and armies and important assemblymen. Let us learn about ordinary people. So, the kings, they are important enough that people used to write prashastis about them, they used to write biography about them. How do we know about the people who used to live a normal ordinary life? Let us learn about it. We can catch an occasional glimpse of the lives of ordinary people from plays and other accounts. Let us look at some of those. Now let us look at ordinary people. Okay. So, occasional glimpse on the lives of ordinary people are evident from plays such as Abhijana Shakuntalam, okay, Silapadikaram and accounts of Fajian. Let us read now. Kalidasa is known for his plays depicting life in the king's court. Okay, there was a very great poet, Kalidasa. Okay, he used to write plays which used to depict life in king's courts. An interesting feature about these plays is that the kings and Brahmins are shown as speaking Sanskrit, while women and men other than the king and Brahmins use Prakrit. You are familiar with both of these languages, I suppose. We have seen these languages mentioned in our earlier chapters as well. Now, Kalidasa's most famous play, underline this, his most famous play was Abhijana Shakuntalam, is the story of a love between a king named Dushyanta and a young woman named Shakuntala. His most famous play is a love story between the king Dushyant and a woman named Shakuntala. A fisherman finds a ring. Let us read that. A fisherman found a precious ring which the king had given to Shakuntala, but which had been accidentally swallowed by a fish. When he went to the palace with it, the gateman accused him of theft, and the chief police officer was rather rude. So there is an account given here from Abhijana Shakuntalam. Okay, the king gave Shakuntala a ring which was swallowed by a fish. A fisherman caught it. When he cut the fish, he found the ring inside the fish's stomach. Okay. So when the fisherman went to the king's palace, the guards were rude and they accused him of theft. However, the king was happy when he saw the ring and sent a reward for the fisherman. Then the police officer and the gateman decided to take a share of the reward and went along with the fisherman to have a drink. The guards, what did they do? They demanded a share from the reward from the fisherman. Now also, Chinese pilgrim Fa Jian noticed the plight of those who were treated as untouchables by the high and the mighty. Okay. So Fa Jian, a Chinese Buddhist pilgrim, also wrote about the normal life of people. He has written especially about untouchables, people who are not supposed to be touched. They were expected to live on the outskirts of the city. What does this word here mean, outskirts? It means outside the city. The people who were regarded as untouchables, the cleaners, the sweepers, the shudras, okay, they were supposed to live outside of the city, okay, and they had to perform menial tasks, small tasks which no other person does. They were supposed to do that task. And there's a very important thing here he has written. If such a man enters a town or a marketplace, he strikes a piece of wood in order to keep himself separate. He has written, Fa Jian has written, the Chinese pilgrim, that if an untouchable is entering the city market, he was supposed to strike a piece of wood. He used to take a piece of wood and strike it. Why? So that people who hears that sound knows what it means and avoid touching him or brushing against him. When he used to strike a piece of wood, there used to be a loud sound, and the people will realize that this person is an untouchable and we are not supposed to touch him. And Banabhatta provides us with a vivid picture of the king's army on the move. And Banabhatta has also written about a king's army who is riding. In this paragraph on page number 111, okay, you will find a description of a king's army. Banabhatta has written that the king traveled with an enormous amount of equipment, that whenever a king used to march against its enemy, they used to travel with weapons, pots, pans, furniture, golden footstools, food. Okay? Now food included animals such as goat, deer, rabbits, vegetables. Spices carried on carts or loaded onto pack animals such as camels and elephants. The huge army was accompanied by musicians beating drums and other playing horns and trumpets. The army was also accompanied by musicians who used to beat drums, play horns and trumpets. Villagers had to provide hospitality along the way. They came with gift. Now the villagers who used to observe this army, they used to come to the king with curds, okay, gur and flour. Gur is jaggery, okay, and they provided fodder for the animals, and they also tried to meet the king and place their complaints and petitions before him. The army left a trail of destruction behind. Elephants often trampled down the huts of villagers, and the oxen yoked to the caravans of merchants ran away scared by the summit. And Banabhatta has specially written, the whole world was swallowed up in dust. So student, this was it for our chapter, that is chapter number 10, New Empires and Kingdoms. Please go through the video very carefully. I hope you have marked all the internal questions. We'll meet again in our next class. Until then, take care.